I have a difficult job today of positioning what we're doing. We're reaching Augustine now. But to put you into the context of the program, because this is a program, a CVSP program, this course usually comes after you have been well exposed to the Greek and Roman world of 201. Now we fill in the gap with a little bit of, with a bit of pepper and salt of the Greek world at the beginning. But to appreciate what's happening in 202, it's very important to at least be aware of some basic things that are in people's minds, and particularly now in the mind of Augustine. From the Greek and Roman world, from what we get in 202, there were two great ways of trying to understand the world. And this is one way that we've always understood CVSP. CVSP is always under, has been under change and trying to see what are we trying to do. But what we primarily set out to do, and what we did for many, many years, was to expose students to some very influential and living ways of understanding the world we live in. So when you to help you understand this a little bit more specifically, every one of us, whatever we are doing, has consciously or unconsciously what we used to call a worldview. And we used to put it in this way because we found it helpful for students. Whether you are conscious of it or not, you have a view of the divine. The divine can be God, if you think of the Abrahamic monotheistic God. It could be God, if you think of the Socratic, Platonic, Aristotelian, Greek approach to, finally, to the divine. Or you can think of it in terms of many, 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 many gods, polytheism, which is still very much alive in the world today, in many cultures of the world today. There are many gods. There isn't one God, neither an Abrahamic God, a personal God, a loving God, a merciful God, a God who forgives you, a God who is concerned for you, a God who is with you all the time. That's the basic aspect of the Abrahamic God, a personal God, a God that you encounter in your relationships with other people, and then directly through prayer and whatever else. But this God is real there in your life all the time, in a typical Abrahamic context that Augustine was exposed to. Augustine is in the Christian world now, assuming the Hebraic world, and therefore the world of what is called the Christian Bible, because the Bible is the Jewish Bible, and then the Christians came and took the Jewish Bible and added to it what they called the 27 books of the New Testament, and this became, of the New Covenant, and this became the Christian part of the whole Bible. And of course, for Christians, the way they understood it was that the Hebrew Bible could not be understood. It was waiting for clarification when the Messiah came. So the Hebrew world is still expecting the Messiah to come. The Christians are those who claimed that Jesus of Nazareth was the Messiah that the Hebrew world was awaiting. And on that basis, what they understood was that they were now carrying the Abrahamic monotheistic message to all of mankind, but that you could not understand it except now in terms of what has happened in the Christian event, in the Jesus of Nazareth event. So the 27 books of the New Covenant, why is it New Covenant? The idea there is that God, the relationship of the human to the divine, is a covenant relationship. And a covenant meant something, a very strong bond, a very strong promise, a very strong oath, a very strong relationship. And so from the word covenant, we get that we are now in 202, differently from the Greek world, very much in a world where the most important thing are relationships. So covenant is not just a simple word, it's a concept. It becomes this is the focus of life. The focus of life is covenant, relationships. You are an excellent human or a mediocre human, you're a good human or a wicked human, all on the basis of your ability to relate with faith. And faith meant faithfulness. Faith didn't mean just believing in a dogma. Everybody has a dogma. Everybody believes in something or they cannot live. But the life is what's important in these communities. Thus, when you, and I'm trying to fill in the gap of the biblical background to Augustine. the basic aspect that affected Augustine and affected all of Christianity after him. Basically, the covenant, that when you think of the divine, you're not just thinking of a great force, a great power, something that a judge, whatever words you may want to think of, but rather you're thinking of something that can be analogous to a human relationship. So the first words of Genesis in the Bible is that God, the first chapters, this God, the one God, speaks all of creation into being. So already you have a dualism. The previous cultures primarily were in philosophy monistic or polytheistic, but not dualistic in the sense of the basic Greek understanding of the world was Homer's view. And there's no God who creates. There's no creator. They tried to take things back to beyond Zeus, the god of Homer, back to Kronos, time, back to Uranus, but they never really gave us an answer to why are things there. Their perspective was things are there, given. The cosmos was worshipped as divine and eternal. Nothing created it. Everything divine was part of the cosmos. So Hesiod had taught them that gods and men all come from the same origin. So it's very important for you in perhaps the Middle East world of monotheism not to think of God as the creator previously to monotheism in this sort of way. Just speaks things. There are creator gods in other cultures, but they always are using something to bring something into account, and they're not the only God. They share this God. So primarily, the problem now in the Roman Empire, I'm sorry, my fault. I got the wrong one, but it's okay because this is a longer one than I had wanted, but it does introduce you to the previous world. Okay, the whole world of monotheism starts supposedly with the creation of the world, not the creation of Adam, the creation of the whole world. Then the summit of creation is when God creates the human being. So Adam represents the human being, not a particular Adam or something like that, but Adam meaning the first human, and Eve the first female, and they're presented in a relationship way. The human cannot survive simply as an atom, as one. So Adam does not make it until he has an Eve. So Adam and Eve are the ways where to first understand their understanding of what's the human being like. So the human being turns out to be the focus of God's attention. Everything is created for the sake of the human, and male and female is the human. Total equality in terms of that first picture of the human being is not completed until he has an Eve, and then when he gets an Eve, he says, "Aha! Now I am complete. Now I can function." Male and female are both created in the image of God. So it's God creates man in the image of God. Male and female, He creates them. So that's the first thing you need to have the understanding of the human. Is that the human somehow is very, very important. So forget all the stuff about the science of the day and whether, and then the Aristotelian science, which is then called the science of the church in the middle, the church was using Aristotle's conception of science. So the Bible was not talking about science. The Bible was talking about in relationship to polytheistic beliefs of the time, and when you read them in context, as I try to do in 207i, and we used to do this in 202, you see that one way you can look at them intelligently is to see them as a dialogue with the polytheistic world. So there were creation stories in Egypt, there were creation stories from Mesopotamia, there were all sorts of creation stories. And when you compare them with this creation story, which comes later than the others, it's kind of a dialogue saying, no, that's not what the divine is like. This is not how things happen. That's not what the human being is like. The human being isn't just the corpse of dead gods, as in the Gilgamesh story and the Akkadian creation epics, nor is he just something that one god put together on a potter's wheel with material, but that there's something very special about the human being. And this, of course, is a very controversial issue all through the centuries up to today. Why should we believe the human being has such speciality? Well, those who continue to be believers in the Abrahamic religion, and they are many, and they are high scholars. The Big Bang Theory was formulated by a Catholic priest in Belgium. Nobody ever mentions him when they talk about the Big Bang Theory. So this is not sort of stupid people continuing these beliefs. These are people who are really top-flight thinkers in their own fields, wherever they are, who continue to look at this stuff, and they take it seriously. So the first thing they take seriously, I don't have time to tell you why they take it seriously, is the starting point, is that the human being is the focus of the divine. Right? Now, in polytheism, this certainly was not the case. In everything we read in 201, there was never the human being is the human being, not some special human being, someone like me who's really worth creating or something, but every human being. Even me, even if you think I'm a nothing, that any human being, handicapped, whatever wish you wish to, challenge, sorry, I'm not using the right word, whatever, they're a human being. You cannot be any better than that. You can't, a human being has infinite value because they are analogously children of God, not physical children, but the relationship, the covenant relationship, is a family relationship. That's the picture they look at it as. So therefore, no matter how powerful you are, how rich you are, how intelligent you are, you have infinite value to start with. And so infinity plus all the things you want to add on to it equal infinity. It doesn't give you any added true value in this picture. So humans now, we distinguish one another from this is more intelligent than this is more handsome than this is that and that. But that's a human way of looking at it. Supposedly, the divine way of looking at humans is that every human is not an accident. Every human is the creation of God. Every human being is as precious to the God as a first son is to a human in a traditional society of their time. So to start with, that's the human. Now coming forward through that, that's the first page, on the very first page of the fly sheet, because we only have one lecture to do everything in today. These are 4 lectures really that can really get you into Augustine, with Augustine. Yeah. Now I have to do this background, otherwise I don't feel right in just speaking to you about some abstract epoch and an author who's very controversial, but very, very, very important. Augustine influenced philosophy after him, he influenced religion after him, he influenced many, many things. So the second thing that we think of as when we try to understand our humanity is the world of nature. All right, today the environment. Are we given the environment to do whatever we like with it? Can we, just continue to make profit and deny that there's global warming? And, do we have any responsibility towards nature? Well, the responsibility towards nature is built into the fact that the human being is created in the image and likeness of God as a first son in that tradition. And in that tradition, a first son takes over the work of the father. So the human being takes over the work of God. So God is giving, in Islam, the Khalifatullah on this earth. Okay, what is Khalifa? A Khalifa is someone who does something a wakil, something given to them, but to do it in the best possible way to please the one who has given you the wakali, has given you this job. So however theology gets into all of this and interprets it whichever way it wishes, there are many ways of doing that. I'm trying to cut through to the basic cultural civilization sequence program that we had before, cultural studies it was called. We went to the heart of things. What is the heart? If you have a quick course like this, so that you can go and look into this much more deeply later on. But as a first step, well, what's the kind of world, the intellectual world of the text that you are reading? Well, the intellectual world of an Augustine is first of all the biblical world. You can get the whole of the Bible from Augustine's work. If ever you lose the Bible as such, you get the whole of the Bible in Augustine's work. So number one, he was thoroughly steeped in the biblical work. Number two, until he was 30 years of age, he had rejected Christianity, he had rejected monotheism. He went through everything that was important in those days. He tried astrology, he tried Manichaeism, a kind of mysticism that claimed that Mani was the one that was bringing the truth, and that so the Manichaeans, in fact, what happened was they started to present it as the true Christianity. And scholars have have come to the conclusion seriously that Christianity in the West was threatened at that time to become Manichaeism. It became the Christianity that's more sort of the typical Abrahamic monotheistic religion, not just through Augustine, because the East never took over Manichaeism, but in the West, it was a very, very strong challenge. And only someone like an Augustine, maybe the best philosophical mind of his day, at least among the best of his day, who had gone through astrology, had gone through Manichaeism, he'd gone through skepticism, and then he comes to Platonism. And Platonism is where he lands in terms intellectually. Intellectually now, with all of the beliefs and experience and everything he has accumulated as a first-rate thinker, he lands in Platonism. And with Platonism, and hopefully that your teachers will help you more with that, but Platonism through the Roman philosopher Plotinus, that's why the title of the lecture, because that reflects what I'm trying to do. I want to reach Augustine, but I want to go back to how the main things that form him are the Bible, and in philosophy, Plato via Plotinus to Augustine. Who is Plotinus? Plotinus thought he was simply continuing Plato's philosophy about 600, 700 years after Plato. However, when we really look at Plotinus, we find in him, certainly, the basis is Plato, but he has certainly developed, at least, many, many themes that Plato has simply begun to investigate. And Plotinus was now in the Roman world, in the world of the Roman Empire. Greek was the primary language, the Koinonia Greek, that was the common language, and Greek was still very important as although Latin had now become the major language. But Plotinus, which you were assigned earlier in this course, and I hope you don't think you can really get through to Plotinus. He's one of the most difficult people. But what he was doing, he made out of Plato's basic system, which was still really much more open than people give him credit to. He made it into a system, all right? A full system, and that's what I perhaps should start with here when I get to this is all the stuff, that the context of 202, and a full introductory lecture is worthwhile on all of this material, but we now only give this one lecture on Augustine to enter you into the whole Christian world and to this one very important and not simple and superficial philosopher. You can't just understand him in terms of cliches about him. You find people, I've found over the 50 years, very funny to find some people who are very open-minded and all of this. They don't know anything about Augustine, but they really know, they think they know all about Augustine. And they give me a few, that's me, by the way, before I lost a bit more hair. Okay, but this is kind of to introduce you to the whole package from Gilgamesh. Now, we only started with the monotheistic world, but we were there to our world today. And why these figures here? Because basically this is it. CVSP is an exposure to a variety of modes of communicating insights into what gives meaning to human life. And I had hoped you would have some of these slides. So this is not the fly sheet I had wanted for today. I wanted the one from last spring. This is an older one. Okay, that's my fault. All forms of art and literature, socioeconomic, political life, science, technology, human relations, philosophical, religious, and spiritual experience. CVSP 201 exposes us to polytheistic experience, mainly cultures were polytheistic, expressed via poetry, myth, and then they get to two very important ways of understanding life. A tragic and a rationalistic, but rationalistic included scientific. So when you think rationalistic, the whole world that later becomes the scientific world was the world of the philosophical world. So yes, I'll take her off and what's happening. This was to show you how the mythological creatures in the earliest things you write continue to have the same kind of impact when they come back up to us in different forms, so that Ishtar and Venus and Aphrodite, were very important goddesses in the ancient world. Ishtar was an especially mean one if you read Gilgamesh, but Gilgamesh was trying to argue with. He was the rational one in the Epic of Gilgamesh. He was arguing with her, telling her why he doesn't want to do what she wants, but no rationality. You don't do what I want, I'll go to my daddy, and he'll send the Range Rovers out and the bodyguard, and you'll see what happens to you, Gilgamesh. So make sure you do read Gilgamesh sometime. It's a lovely work, and it helps you to see how people have understood their gods, not sort of as a philosophical god or whatever way of an Abrahamic god, but polytheistic cultures look at the divine simply as powerful forces that influence us. And so they put them into these forms. Why? That's a study in itself. Why did they worship them? Why did they kill their children for them? Sacrifice. With the Abrahamic world, the sacrifice of Abraham was first and foremost to tell everybody, not just Moses, not just Abraham, that killing children does not please a God, and certainly not a God who considers every human being on the face of this earth as his children, not their children. And this is what the prophets do in the Hebrew scriptures. Prophet after prophet comes with the message from God. You are sacrificing my children to these gods, because the Hebrews liked the fun of the polytheistic world, and so they'd go back to these other ways of worshiping. And this was a dialogue between monotheism and between the polytheism. The biblical literature at the beginning, and certainly Genesis 1 to 11, it cannot be fully understand, I claim, and many claim with me, unless you really look at it in context as a dialogue with the creation stories and the flood story of Gilgamesh. It comes after the flood story of Gilgamesh, but it tries to tell you, don't believe what Gilgamesh is telling you about that flood, that it just happens because one person there, Noah, Utnapishtim, had wasta, had a connection with one of the main gods, who was betraying the other gods because they had all decided already to exterminate mankind and send a flood to exterminate them. But how come humanity survives? Well, one of the gods betrays the parliament or the council that they had and tells one man to build an ark, and that's why humanity survives. So the biblical one claims to tell you that that's not how you should look at that flood. That flood story happened because this good God, who had been so good to you and so patient with you, if you look at 1 to 11 and continue to come in and try to get you to wake up your senses, but you had so corrupted the world that the world could not continue like that if God was to be a just God, a holy God, a good God. However, in that picture, one person, you see, like here, there's one person in the Gilgamesh one person, Noah, was a man of integrity, was a good man. For one human being, see how the parental thing here, if you have one child that you really think is worthwhile, you don't give up on your family. That one person can carry through the family tradition, all right? And so the message, of course, is that every human being first of all, belongs to God, has infinite value, no matter how whatever extra things they have on them, that doesn't make them any more worthwhile. And you have to treat each other. All humans have to treat each other on this basis. Now, where is the... So, Ishtar. The flood story, therefore, was trying to tell you that humans, you can be secure for the future. There's a promise that God will never allow this to happen at the end of it. In the Gilgamesh story, the only promise made is by Ishtar, the most devious and lacking of integrity. I always asked myself when I first read it, why did these people who are presenting this story, why would they choose Ishtar to give the promise to people? Why didn't they choose one of the, there are other gods and much more worthwhile than this one. And then it occurred to me, because that's the message of that culture, tragedy. A tragic message was already being given through the Epic of Gilgamesh, and then you see it developing in Oedipus and Antiquity, but Oedipus we read there. And the basic view in the tragic world, before you get to the rationalistic world, was that primarily we're in a world where at the mercy of many, many forces. Why did they see them as gods? Well, different people have different views of what are gods and what kind of powers exist in this world, and et cetera, et cetera. But power was the only thing that was there. And the only thing that will help you survive is power. You have to have the right connection. Make sure you know the right people. Any of you ever seen the TV ad for this, probably AUB graduate? She was trying to get a job. And so the guy who was, whom she was trying to hire her, invites her to dinner or to something. And so she asks him, well, please tell me, why did you reject my CV? Was my CV not good enough? And so he tells her, no, your CV is fine. So he says, well, but then why after he finds, well, you need to tell somebody to contact me. All right? It's a wasta system, you see, in other words. That was on Lebanese TV. It's not me. I'm just telling you that wherever you are in a world where you really don't believe that there's something, there is a law that's being respected by everybody, things happen rationally, or they try to happen rationally, and you're in the first part of a tragic world. The second part, and the more important part in a tragic world, is what does the human being do? And that's the question in every culture you're going to be studying. What does that culture tell us through their own works, self-expression? What do they think a human should do? Think of yourselves. If you really believe you're in a tragic world and there are no gods who are going to help you, and on the contrary, like with Oedipus, they may be making you kill your father and marry your mother. No matter how much you try to get away from it, they lead you into it. All right? And then if that's the world you live in, what should you as a human, what should you conclude from this? Should you, I'll try to dabbir hali, I'll try to get in there in the best possible way and be like them. Or the others, what can I do? I'll be a victim and I'll see what happens. All right? No, the Gilgamesh story, the Oedipus story, all of the great tragic literature, even in modern period, and Nietzsche is telling you the same basic sort of thing, that primarily the human being always has reason and responsibility. That these two things go along with the human being. Gilgamesh had the responsibility of ruling his land. Oedipus was the king of his land. All right, they have a responsibility. Watch how they take that responsibility, especially Oedipus. Oedipus takes that responsibility to such a degree that he's ready to believe, he's ready to accept the will of the people, the chorus. It's a democracy. Sophocles is presenting him as a model for a democratic ruler. You see, and people skip over because they read it with their own preconceived ideas, and later great literature, inspires great things. But go back to these cultures. Why am I talking about this? Because we have to do this to understand each other. We have to do this to understand different cultures today. And one of the ways we learn it is when we break through the cliches about the past, who needs the past and all that. Well, you're standing on the shoulders of the people, of the Oedipuses and the Gilgameshes and the Socrateses, the people, that kind of approach. The human being in the tragic world, like in the rationalistic world, like in the Abrahamic world, the human being gives himself meaning, gives herself meaning. All right, if there's a God, okay, that meaning comes from God. But your role and your responsibility is do something with what you have. What are you given? What do you know? Do your best with it. Apollo, know thyself, balance is best. The two great things that finally the Greek world was following as a way, the two commandments. How do you live? Seek to know, seek knowledge, no matter what it costs you. Seek knowledge in an excellent way. That's Oedipus. Seek knowledge to really see who you really are, not sort of get in touch with yourself, but rather seek the knowledge of the cosmos, seek the knowledge of what the world is really working like, so you can see how you fit in to this whole package, not just be in your own little cave, as Bacon will call it later on. But anyway, basically, the tragic world then says, look at Gilgamesh, look at Oedipus. One can even see this tragic element in this aspect of the tragic element in the Abraham story. He's ready to do something that his reason tells him is a good thing to do. They're all using reason. Why is Abraham ready to sacrifice his son? Because he's supposedly, you have to take the givens. He's experienced this God. This God has been so wonderful. It's obvious this is God and not just another man for him. And his reason is working on what he believes is given. And so if this God then tells him, go and sacrifice your son, number one, this is what he's polytheistic. He was in Iraq. He was in Mesopotamia. All the gods there, one form of sacrificing to them, and the highest form, would be to sacrifice your children to them. So it wasn't an absurd thing. It was in context. It was a difficult thing to do to show Abraham his own readiness, his own faithfulness, his own integrity, his own gratitude, his own worth as a human being. All right. And so after that, of course, human sacrifice in the Abrahamic world definitely was forbidden. Didn't mean it didn't go on. they went on doing it, but it became, something that you didn't do. So it was a very rational thing the man was doing. So notice I'm using the word rational just to provoke you, because we always think of rational couldn't be about anything religious, and a religious man could not be using reason. I told you about Georges Lemaitre, who packaged the Big Bang Theory, and Einstein thought it was stupid, and later on he accepted it. And now nobody even mentions Georges Lemaitre when they're giving Darwin lectures. The only one who did was Professor, the MD who gave it, Georges Haddad, the neurologist, when he gave the Darwin lecture a couple of times. He was the first one to mention, and then I looked it up, and it was true. I didn't even know it. So don't let this sort of silly cliche between religion and science. There's, as Bacon would say later on in the modern period, there's bad science and there's bad religion. There's good science and there's good religion. And if you want the good science and the good religion, break through today, he would tell us, break through these cliches of science versus religion. There are just as horrible things happening in the scientific world as there are in the religious world, and there are just as many wonderful things happening, because as Mark Twain, the American novelist in the 19th century, had said, I don't care in America if he's a Catholic or a Protestant or a Jew, because this was the Tawa'if of the day, all right? That I don't care he's a human being. He couldn't be worse. So you start off with our common humanity, all right? And you admit that humanity isn't all just wonderful and good, and there is that. And you go on from there, and you start to see how much you have in common as human beings. And then you start to get into being able to truly evaluate these different cultures without the preconceived idea and the cave mentality and the slogan following the latest things. So, So to put you into this focus, and I'm sure your teachers can handle Augustine, they've all taught him before, but to give you the background, the context, and not just simply facts that you can get on the web or something, but interpretation, and you can reject everything I'm saying and be free to reject everything your teachers say and I say, but listen to it, try to understand it, realize we have very little time to give you the full picture of what we're saying, but we plant seeds, we plant little time bombs in your mind that will go off later on when you have more to do it. But one thing we must try to do in our courses is keep you away from cliches and slogans and the politically correct views of the day and all of that by giving as much context. And you can't get context if you don't take a history of ideas course, type of course like CVSP 201, 202, 203, 204. You can change things in it, but without that, you're going to leave this university without what this university was doing for over 100 years. This is what's happening now to this program. We're trying to think of something new that we can, satisfy. But so bear with me. I'm a dinosaur, and dinosaurs will go extinct if I die. So bear with me and don't kill me. But listen to me. So what we call the cultures have been interacting all the time. So and they're still interacting today. And there's no such thing as a pure culture. You can't understand one culture except in understanding the wonderful interaction of many cultures. When you read Herodotus in the Greek world, you come to much more of an awareness of how the ancient Mesopotamian, the Akkadian, the Sumerian, the Babylonian, the Persian, the Hittite, the Phoenician worlds all interacted what came to be called the Hellenic, the Greek, primarily, the 5th century before the Common Era, 500 to 400 years before, in the so-called Age of Pericles, when we had a Socrates, we had a Thucydides, we had a Sophocles, we had a tragedian, a historian, and a rationalistic philosopher come in that same period. But what had they inherited before when they did their wonderful works, which have continued to influence everybody? Well, they were bringing together already ththings that from the ancient Mesopotamian, from the Akkadian, from the Sumerian, from many, many other cultures. So every culture, right from the Greek Hellenic, certainly, which has been so important to influence everyone, it already is a synthesis of elements from the above, as well as some North African elements, as well as what specifically came from the Greek-speaking people, because there wasn't a Greece. The Hellenistic followed them with Alexander, and then the Roman with the Roman Empire, and Far Eastern elements, very rich cultures, developed separately, but inevitably were not totally absent. Things because of the trading and all of this, Far Eastern elements had come through also that were, you can see them in some of the Greek works. The Hebrew Abrahamic monotheism interacted with many of the above. So before you even get to the Roman Empire, the Hebrew monotheistic thing is interacting with them. Now, what, if any, contribution did this people make in our study of this kind of worldviews, of different ways of understanding God, the divine, understanding who the human is, understanding what socioeconomic, political, what government should be like, and understanding what nature is like? Well, all major categories of human cultural and intellectual creative activity were established in other cultures. So the Hebrew culture did not primarily present us with anything that, with codifying and systematizing and building schools that developed in any of the great works, intellectual works we think of, in art, literature, history, science, philosophy, and mysticism. They were established in other countries. However, much of what they were giving and much that's in the Bible is very, very apropos to many of the things they were doing. Art, literature, history, all these things are part of the Bible. But they were primarily interested, and therefore their contribution, they were specialized. Their contribution was in interacting with the various views of what the divine was, and primarily with those that were polytheistic, that there are many gods, or is there one God? Is there one creator, absolute God who controls everything, or is the world really governed by many forces? It's a different way of understanding the world you're living in. If there's one force only, you have to really direct yourself and make sure you really are getting to understand everything that's happening there, or you won't know anything else. If there are many, then you don't have to focus on any one. Then you have a different challenge. You have to sort of make sure you are handling the main forces that affect you, whether they're gods or whether they're human forces or nature forces. So perhaps one may conclude that their unique contribution is their presentation of the divine, because their view of the divine is not just a religious view. That's the point I would be trying to make if I had much more time and to explain it. We're not looking at it as a religion. We're looking at it as a cultural expression of how humans understood themselves, how they understood the divine. And in looking at that, we see how much came out of that for human society, for human thought, for the development of humanity. Many elements came from them, even though they didn't develop schools. That's the Greek genius and the Roman genius. All right? Their genius was focusing on what is, after all, finally, the most important factor in our human lives. If you're an atheist, the most important factor, and a serious atheist like Nietzsche, everything you do in your life should express your serious atheism. If you're what I call an ordinary atheist, fine, then you're not really interested in the question of God. Seriously, you believe it doesn't exist. You may even think intellectually you can prove it doesn't exist, although you can never prove that God does not exist. You may be able to prove that a sort of God could exist, but when you're talking about God in the divine world, you're talking about experience. You're talking about experience of generations and of people, and still experiencing what they understand to be the divine. So there's an atheistic tradition where people coming from monotheistic worlds have come to seriously believe that the God that is worshipped in the Abrahamic world and in the Christian world does not exist. And they will tell you how, and they'll tell you why. Okay, those who still believe in it will tell you why they continue to believe in it. It's not a simple issue. I'm just trying to make that major point. Their unique contribution is their presentation of the divine, with its corresponding implications in the search for fundamental human self-understanding. It gives you a different view of nature. Nature is something you have to take care of. You have responsibility for. You can't just do whatever you like with it. It's given to you to be God-like. So image and likeness of God means you have to do the things that you believe, you understand this God would want you to do. Well, this God would not want you to spoil the creation and make use of it and do all of that, supposedly. So this is nature now takes on much, much more importance in this view for those people, because it's kind of it's your trust. All right, so to be faithful is not just to be believing in this one God, and if somebody doesn't believe in this one God in this particular way, we banish him, or we exile him, or we make him a second-rate citizen, or we put all kinds of harassment on him. All right, and this happens in all the religions, in communist religion, in all religions here, meaning in all the big ideologies of the world. Every culture has a religion in this sense of an overall way of understanding life, and every culture has persecuted people who didn't do what they like, and every culture has produced wonderful people who saw through this rubbish and saw through that this is suicidal. And the human beings, with the coming of nuclear weapons, people started to take more seriously. Human race can commit suicide, seriously. And of course, this was the message of the flood in the Bible, that by doing what they were doing, being so corrupt, they were causing the whole human race to be extinct. But one human was able to do that, to give us the importance of you. So we don't say, what can I do? Everybody's cheating, everybody's stealing, everybody's doing that. Well, the notion here is that you're not really understanding how important you are as an individual, as a human being, who you are and what you are responsible for taking care of. So certainly nature, certainly society, should be governed as a family, brothers and sisters, and we know with one father. So the family image, don't take it literally, and that causes a great problem. This God does not bring children physically into this, but he has a relationship that can best be analogously described as the family of parents, father and mother, because male and female, the parents who really are doing their very best for their family. So the implications are very important, very serious, and some people took it seriously, and that's why monotheism contributed to the progression of humanizing the world. The history, knowledge, all these things. It's helpful in our study to see their scriptures as an ongoing dialogue with the cultures of the day. Many common aspects, significant, unique perspectives, with other cultures, many common aspects with the other cultures. They learned from the other cultures, they took in from other cultures, but they also had their unique view of things. What were the unique aspects? Okay, they're on that first sheet. I'm not going to go through them. I'd love to, because I think they're very important, very, very useful for you to start thinking of the basic things there. I will now spend whatever little time I have left to tell you about Augustine a little bit. This is most people would consider it the first serious autobiography ever written. Okay, before, an autobiography would be like the one written by the Emperor Augustus, telling you how wonderful he was. He imposed peace on the whole world. Great man, all right, and telling you about how great he was. Now, it is said, and there's some serious reason for believing it, that when Augustus Caesar, why did he write his own biography? He wanted the great poet of his day, Virgil, to write his biography. Virgil was very intelligent, a great poet. He said, look, it's better, I will write a great epic about you. So he writes the Aeneid about him. And if you read the Aeneid carefully, you will see that an intelligent person reading it will recognize that he is, number one, putting up a model that against Augustus. Said Augustus, if you are like what you're supposed to be, Rome is great and Rome is wonderful. But it didn't just happen, out of nothing. It happened because of the rational way that they were working, supposedly in the Republic, and the good way they were working. You, Augustus, are spoiling everything, all right? The emperor now. And that if you read the things at the end of chapter 6 and the end of chapter 12, see how much you're missing by not taking Virgil. But he puts things in such a way that anybody who knows what's happening in that thing cannot miss. So, but if Augustus or somebody close to Augustus was going to say, sure, you are criticizing the emperor, he would say, I'm not criticizing the emperor, this is fiction, this is a poem. No, on the contrary, look at the other things in the work where I give Augustus so much importance. So, this is an autobiography where the person is telling you about himself like it is. All right. This is, as after many years and becoming a very serious philosopher in the Plotinus tradition. All right. He becomes a Christian. 11 years after he becomes a Christian, he has all that experience. One of the experiences, by the way, is to put him down to earth. He had decided no more miracles after the New Testament period, and many Protestants believe that. All right, and he really believed that firmly. They forced him to be a bishop. He had to take care of people in their daily life. He came down from his ivory tower and was starting to deal with humans. And he says he witnessed resurrections from the dead. He witnessed miracles. He started to see them. And this was an empirical person. He rejected astrology because he thought it was not scientific, because it claims to be scientific. He rejected Manichaeism because it claimed to be scientific, and when he met their big bosses and all this, he discovered it wasn't. He found that when you get down to earth on looking into these cultures. You'll learn much, much more than what you're just looking at them from the outside and all of this. Now, whether there are miracles or not, miracles are another issue. But this is the case of a person who was ready and humble enough to break his big intellectual dogmas when he came face to face with the facts. And this takes us now into, yes, 5 more minutes? Okay. Sorry, I think the rest of the stuff about Augustine, any of your teachers can handle, but this background I find it's really missing from the whole program. We used to do it in a much, much more careful way. So it's an autobiography. He calls it the Confessions, but Confessions really means the profession, the profession of faith, the shahada, all right? It's a confession of the greatness of God, of the wonderfulness of this God, compared with what he thought was God and what were the gods. It's a confession. So in this confession, he tells you about his own life, about how he found himself responsible for many things that he didn't think he was responsible for. He started to see how some evil things and evil decisions can really warp things much more seriously. He found no answer for this in the Greek world because they didn't believe in this kind of radical evil. No man will commit evil knowingly, said the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, following the Stoic view. No human does evil consciously. If you do evil, you're only doing it ignorantly. He comes and he tells you about a lot in this, how he came to recognize he was doing evil consciously. He knew what he was doing, and he was doing it. And so in philosophy, this became very, 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 very important. This introduces the will into philosophy, because the Greeks were mostly concerned with reason and passion. All right? This is the great war, reason and passion. Okay? Said Habibi, reason and passion, yes, that's wonderful. I mean, he thinks the Plato's great. But you've left out the heart of the human being, the will. What I love, what I desire, my love. And my love is not something, love isn't a word that means that's something good. My love is simply my desire, my decision, what I put my life behind, all right? My love, my will. He says, my will is my love. And that's what decides things. I can know everything. I can realize I shouldn't be selling medicine that isn't true medicine but will kill me. I'm an old man now. I take some medicine. When I take it, I wonder because they're selling all kinds. You think these people don't know what they're doing? They're doing it out of ignorance, or you can continue to talk about this forever. This is a controversy. But what he claimed to come was that the answer to the unpackaging of the whole secret of how to understand everything that was happening, how to understand the Bible, how to understand the other stuff, was to see the impact of the human will and the ability of the human will to delight in evil. Sadism, we're all partly sadistic, but when sadism becomes conscious and you're sadistic and you go on doing it, all right, when you're the rulers of the world are at any moment going to start a nuclear war, is their concern really the human race, or is their concern like a Lebanese politician came back from Washington during our war here, and he was very close to the politicians of the world. He said, they're only interested, Russia and America, those were still the Soviet Union, they're interested in one thing only, but they want to defeat the other person. They don't care what happens along the way. They don't care how many, what's happening to the rest of the world. This was his perception of, and this is of course an exaggeration, but that's the sort of thing that Augustine contributed to philosophy. So after Augustine, people had to deal with the thing of philosophy. Some people rejected it, say no. They followed in the rationalistic perspective. It's just reason, it's just ignorance, just blindness. Once we get knowledge, education. The most educated people tore each other to pieces in World War I and again in World War II. All right, so is it just education? These are very important, as Plato has taught us, that if you don't change the institution, if you don't change the education system, you'll go nowhere. But is that enough? You must do that. But is it enough? The will is how do you get the human will to start to not just use power for their own sake, but how to use power for everybody. And that's sorry, I can't keep you any later than this. Forgive me if it's a horrible lecture, but I can't do Augustine, knowing that the people reading Augustine are going to get a very skewed view of what's happening there just by what's being told them in class or the little bit they read.